My name is Dr. Ola Brown, and today I'll be having an important conversation with one of the most prominent storytellers and entrepreneurs in the African tech space. We'll be talking about both of our careers in technology and how they have intersected. Tomiwa, the CEO of Big Cabal Media, how have you seen the tech ecosystem grow and evolve over the past decade? And what role would you say that Big Cabal Media has had in that evolution?
So hi, Dr. Brown. Thank you for having me for this conversation. Big Cabal Media is the parent company for both Tech Cabal and Zikoko, which are two important publications. Tech Cabal covers the impact of technology and the business of technology across Africa, while Zikoko is a youth publication primarily focused on Nigeria. So Tech Cabal has been really critical and has been an essential part of the ecosystem for quite a while now. We started to publish in 2014, and over that period, we've chronicled a startup scene that was really quite nascent at the time, still very, very young, very inexperienced, founders just kind of trying their first experiments, to one that is increasingly powerful, increasingly influential. The numbers are rising, the impact of the businesses are rising. You regularly see with sort of big fintech companies, your Paystacks, your Flutterwaves, and the like, where, or PiggyVest, the kind of transactions they would do in their first 2, 3, 4 years, they're doing in a single day now. And you can see that evolution of the technology ecosystem. Over that period, we've covered the journeys of all of those companies, and we've been really influential in helping people from outside of the continent and on the continent, whether investors, whether founders, whether entrepreneurs, whether people who are just curious about what's happening in technology, understand how the ecosystem has evolved and understand what's important, what problems that founders are solving, what challenges that entrepreneurs face, what regulators are doing right or doing wrong, or where they need to think differently. It's been amazing to be able to cover that evolution and to help provide the context, the data, the events, and all the information that people need to really understand how technology is changing Africa.
So kind of like The Economist, but for African tech.
All right, so the analogy of Tech Cabal as the Economist for Africa is really interesting. And it's a great one for us because when we first started, we really focused on the startup scene. And so it was, some interesting founders doing interesting things. Let's see what it is that they're doing. Over time, we've changed our perspective on things. In late 2019, we did a strategy document and we looked at what had happened with technology and startups over the last decade or so and what was coming. And essentially we decided that startups are interesting, but what we're really interested in covering is how is technology changing the continent? And that means going beyond startups to big tech. It means looking at how global platforms are affecting the continent. It looks at industries beyond the core tech industry, but how is technology affecting agriculture? How is it affecting retail? How is it affecting young people looking for their first job out of university? And so when we first started, we might have been TechCrunch for Africa, but ultimately, I think where we're going now is we want to be The Economist, we want to be Bloomberg, we want to be what a business person wakes up in the morning and reads first. Because if technology is going to be the most important thing changing or affecting the development of the continent over the next decade and beyond, then we want to be the most important publication covering those changes. And we want to do that not just for tech bros on Twitter, but for everyone. So there's actually two taglines that we've kind of adopted internally. One is there's technology in everything.
Absolutely.
In other words, we're not just talking about startup scene, we're talking about everyone and everything that's affected by technology. And the second thing is we want to speak to a much broader range of people about how that is happening. So we say everyone is invited. So there's tech in everything and everyone is invited.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a really, really powerful narrative. And I mean, everything that we read in The Economist, because it comes out at the end of the week, we've already heard the news.
Yes.
But I think people rely on The Economist to help them interpret the news and organize their thoughts around the news. And I think that when I read Tech Cabal's take on regulatory issues, I already know what they are, but Tech Cabal, for me personally, actually gives me context. Which leads me to my next question, which might be a bit tricky. What have you been most proud of in terms of Tech Cabal's journey so far?
I think it's really going beyond the limits of what people expect. As a team, as a business, and you talked about me as a storyteller and as an entrepreneur. So I actually think of myself as leading a team of great storytellers. As the leader of the business, as the CEO of the business, your job is to tell a story that inspires your team and that inspires investors, that inspires the market.
Absolutely.
But for the team themselves, it's their goal to tell fantastic stories about what's happening on the continent. And I think what I'm really proud of as a business is that we didn't stick to what was expected. So we started as a technology blog, and we've seen a lot of technology blogs stay technology blogs.
Absolutely.
But with Tech Cabal, we've gone beyond that. We've built a great events business where we bring together the most important players in technology in Africa to give context to what's happening, for the entrepreneurs to talk about why they're doing what they're doing in their businesses, for the regulators to come and explain their perspective. That's been fantastic. We've done big multimedia projects like Tech Women Lagos, where we showcased, interviewed and photographed women in technology and built, a website and a physical exhibition. All of that allows people to get deeper into the ecosystem. It gives people an ability to understand what's happening. We're doing big hybrid conference events now. Our Future of Commerce conference, which we did earlier this year.
Fantastic.
That was really, really cool. This opportunity to bring people from all over the world, whether it's Silicon Valley or Asia or across Africa, with entrepreneurs on the continent, investors on the continent, and showcase here's what's happening. And what's fantastic is do a great physical event, but also do a great virtual event for everybody who's not able to attend physically. So for me, what's been great is to go beyond the boundaries of the expected, and to build something that's really robust. And that's been fantastic from a storytelling perspective, but also from a business perspective, because it's allowed us to build a much more interesting and much more robust business than people might have expected. And media is in a tricky place on a global basis. And so it's an interesting investment space where people wonder, will the media businesses, the digital media businesses, will they prove out their value? For us, by going beyond the expected from a business model perspective, from a content generation perspective, from a format perspective, we've been able to build what, for us, is a really interesting business. And to borrow from Jeff Bezos, it's still day one. We're still sort of at the starting point of building what we think is going to be a really generationally impactful and important business. But even with the little that we've done, we've gone beyond a lot of expectations, and I think we've done a lot more interesting things than you might have expected. So that we're really proud of.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So my next question is, and it's a bit biased,
because
I invested along with Green Tree Investments, the firm that we were investing for at the time. I and our partners invested in 2017 in FDHIC Cabal, actually. So what I wanted to ask was, what have investors contributed to your business? Obviously, we know that investors are most known for sort of the financial contribution, but what do you think the role of your investors has been beyond the money?
A few things. Encouragement is one. Strategic advice definitely comes in very valuable. So at really tough periods, it's been great to have people to go to and say, hey, this isn't working. This is problematic. How do we solve it? People bring in their business experience to you and bring in their ideas. I actually remember you and I having a really interesting conversation during the lockdown and COVID last year, which inspired a product that we're still working on and we will continue to work on next year. So great ideas like that come from investors going, have you thought about pushing your business in this direction? Are there opportunities in this space? Most recently, we've found some of our investors really push us to think bigger, to be more aggressive in our goals, to be more aggressive and expansive with our vision. And that's really useful because you get deeply operational. You get into the weeds of how do we solve this problem? How do we move one step forward? And it's great to have people who challenge you to lift your head up and look at a broader basis, at a broader level and go, hey, what can you be? Where can you really take this thing? How big can it be? And what you were going to do in 5 years, could you do in 1? Could you do in 2? That kind of challenge is useful. It's really useful, and it's allowed us to push further and faster than we might otherwise have.
Fantastic, and that's great to hear. My final question is around where you see FDHIC Cabal going in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. What do you think is the future? People talk about the disintermediation of the media, where everybody with, a few followers on Twitter or Instagram becomes a journalist, and who really then is providing the context for people, who is helping people understand, and sort of, bring together, the thousands and millions of tweets and Instagram posts that come out every minute, every hour, and how do you see Big Cabal fitting into that, and sort of what's your vision for the next 5 years?
I'm a big believer in the media. I mean, I work in a media business, a media technology business, because I think the media is important. And I think people today underestimate the importance of the formalized media industry. As much as everybody is doing their tweets, as much as everybody, can create a video that goes viral and has whatever impact it is, the truth of the matter is that the majority of us are still getting the core of our news from really, really important publications and media platforms that are doing the job of digging, of finding out what's happening behind the scenes, that are asking hard questions, and then are providing context so that you understand what it is that's happening in the world around you. As much as people complain about the New York Times and one article that they wrote that was problematic, or one opinion that they published that people don't think should be published, the fact of the matter is that millions and millions of people read it on a daily basis to understand what's happening in the world around them. And so I think the media will continue to be super important, and formalized media businesses will be super important. When I look at Africa's tech ecosystem, I look at what we're trying to do with Tech Cabal, for instance. Like you've said, who's going to provide the context so people understand what's happening? Who's going to do research? All these companies are taking in money. Who's going to understand, are their business models working? Who's going to ask what's happening behind the scenes? Are people being faithful to their investors, to their employees? Who is going to ask all of those hard questions? Who's going to provide the information? Again, I mean, we're in the days of Substack, we're in the days of Twitter. Anybody can have an opinion, but is it an informed opinion? One thing that's really difficult for solo creators, whether they're writers or video creators, is to do research, is to do their homework, is to provide the resources for reporters to go and do big, expansive, investigative pieces or reporting pieces. And so for us, we think the media is really, really important. We think Tech Cabal will play that role for the technology space to help people really understand, to dedicate the resources to understand what's happening in Francophone Africa, or how Northern Africa's tech ecosystem is evolving, what's happening in East Africa, and how does it affect what's happening here in Western Africa. What do these mergers that are happening mean, and what's the future of technology across the continent? Someone's got to do that homework. Someone's got to do that. We think it's going to be us. As a business, what's the future of the business? We're super excited about building a long-term, really important media and technology business. And when we look at great businesses, whether it's Netflix, whether it's CNN, whether it's New York Times, media is actually still a really, really good business. It's a tough business, but it's a great business. It's delivered great returns for its investors. And so for us, in the long term, we think there's the opportunity. And what's also important to note, again, to borrow from Jeff Bezos, is you do have to take a long-term view of this. So the next 3 to 5 years will be really interesting periods for us, but next 3 to 5 years are still building, because the great media businesses are 100-year-old businesses.
Absolutely.
Like, to build a media business that matters, you can build one fairly quickly and get to scale fairly quickly, but really, the proof of a media business that matters is that 100 years later, it's still serving people, it's still building. And when I look at Africa, I say we don't have enough great media businesses. There's nobody creating content at the scale and quality that it needs to be. There's nobody addressing the various segments. We have 2 publications today. In 3 to 5 years, we'll be up to 5 to 8 publications as a business, because there's so many important audience niches where nobody's creating content, nobody's speaking to the audiences, and so we believe that we will be the business to fill in those spaces. The last thing is that from a technology perspective, we have audiences that we're really close to, that we understand really well, that we have a great ongoing relationship with. They come to us and they say, do more of this. This is really valuable to us. And so we think there's a opportunity to build a really important technology business within our business, to build tools that serve our audience, to build products that serve our audience. And so we're deepening our investment in that. We're deepening our investment in video content creation. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we expect to really scale dramatically and to do really much more important things as a business. And build something that, for an investor return perspective, from an audience return perspective, building something that has impact and that matters to them is really, really significant. That's it. That
sounds fabulous. So thank you for sharing, first of all, looking back, I guess, and looking back at where we started from in the ecosystem. And I can remember those days when it was just sort of one company raising like $20,000 and everybody celebrated, to the sophisticated world leader in some areas, like financial technology, for instance, where we see like African companies obviously even having a comparative advantage to their counterparts in the Western world. And going on that journey with you and seeing it through your eyes has been really useful. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Let me ask, about the Catalyst fund that you're starting. So you're starting something really exciting. Can you tell us a bit about it? What's going to be the focus? Who's going to be in it? And what do you hope to accomplish?
So my journey with tech started around 2014. And I'd already built a successful business. We had returns, we had profits. And I started thinking about, what to do next. Like, we'd built it, it was a resilient business, I had good managers, and I didn't want to continue investing in the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So I'd done that for some time. And I can remember the exact point where I said, I have to look at another type of investing. And it was at the AGM of a big Nigerian bank. And I'd bought tons of shares, right?
Okay.
So there's this bit at the annual general meeting of every bank where they recognize the significant shareholders. So because I had spent what I thought was a lot of my money, I expected to be recognized, and they didn't call my name.
Wow. Yeah.
I had lots of questions. I wanted to speak to the CFO. I wanted to be involved in what I thought was our bank. Yeah. But in the grand scheme of things, right, I wasn't a very significant investor. There were tons of more significant investors. And I realized that I wanted to do something a bit hands-on with my investing, and perhaps, dedicating all of our residual earnings, because we're making large profits at the time, just to, things on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, wasn't as hands-on as I wanted to be. So I started speaking to a few friends about it, and they were like, we can... there's this new technology wave. We don't know where it's going to go, but it might be worth riding. Let's get some money together. Let's speak to some institutions in Nigeria and see if we can raise the funds to invest in startups. And I thought that was a lot more interesting because I got to be hands-on. I got to ask questions. The CFO did tell me to go and sit down.
You were not investor number 7,854.
Correct. Yeah. This was a 100-year-old bank, right? Yeah. So it wasn't as if
700,000.
It's not as if they'd grown quite successfully without my help. And I felt like I could make more impact by being more hands-on. So we raised that money. We had about 20 initial shareholders. We got a really experienced chairman, Mr. Bode Augusto, who was also an LP in the fund, even though we're the directors, so we're the GPs as well. We began to start looking at technology businesses. And one of the first businesses we invested in was Paystack. Which was at the time, pre-Y Combinator, and we were also very inexperienced as investors. So when they told me that they were going to go and spend months in Silicon Valley and Y Combinator, I said, look, why would you go to America when the business is in Nigeria? You're supposed to be like looking after your operations, building the business. You won't have time to acquire customers. If you're in America, who's going to do your sales and marketing? So we were very inexperienced at the time about how technology businesses run. But I still have the email of one of the partners in Greentree. That was the fund we started. Saying, we've got to, help one of the founders of Paystack, prepare for this Y Combinator interview, right? right? So we're there thinking about, what could the questions be? Like looking on the internet, like really sort of a scrappy start. Since then, we've invested in quite a number of successful companies, including big Cabal Media. That was the first sort of experience. So we fully invested that fund. We're able to return a good amount of money to shareholders with that fund. And then I started because I'd started a healthcare business, I studied medicine and surgery before I studied finance and economics. So that's sort of my area of expertise. So I really wanted to do something focused on healthcare. So the second vehicle that I started on my own as a solo GP to invest focused on healthcare, and that was successful as well, and we've got some very good companies in that vehicle, but again, this was another institution, and both of them were only returning money to institutions that already had money.
Gotcha. Okay.
So when we started thinking about, okay, this fund is fully invested as well, what do we want to do next? I wanted a more community-based approach. One of the things that I've learned from the journeys, the early sort of beginnings of the journey in 2014, is that deep subject expertise matters when you're investing. Yes. I think specialist funds often outperform more generous funds because the GPs, the founders, the directors have a lot of subject matter expertise. And I think in areas like healthcare particularly, where it's very broad, you have biotechnology, for instance, where you have to be able to interpret scientific papers. When I think about cases like Theranos, where the investors may have been non-subject matter experts and perhaps not being able to appraise evidence, clinical evidence, or scientific evidence in the right way. I thought that this was something that we definitely had the expertise for as a team. And then financial technology as well, sort of my academic exposure at least, is in finance and economics. And then also in terms of professional exposure, we've mostly invested in financial technology companies. In terms of publications, again, academic experience, I've written books on finance. So I felt like starting something that around the thesis of deep subject matter expertise, number one, that combines sort of the two things that myself and my team are really good at, which is healthcare and finance, and technology. And then making sure that perhaps for this fund, we gave an opportunity to build community around it. So have LPs that were ordinary people, but obviously accredited investors, but people that work in pharmaceutical companies, doctors like myself, practicing clinical doctors, bankers, people that work, in traditional banks that may want that exposure. To be able to give an opportunity for ordinary people to see the kind of returns that obviously we saw in the institutions that invested in us saw in the first two funds, as well as deepening that subject matter expertise, because a lot of the LPs, no surprise, because it's a healthcare and fintech focused fund, and a lot of the LPs, a lot of the people that are interested in investing are also subject matter experts.
So they
can give the companies advice. They can, ask a lot of hard questions. They can do a lot of visioning around what the companies want to do and could be. I felt like, this was a model that, in terms of values, in terms of where we were now, where we've seen the money go back to institutions that had already got money in the first place, and we wanted to build a community that could also experience that kind of return, so kind of democratize our LP base in a way, but also double down on what we're really good at, which is healthcare and finance. I thought that, starting the syndicate fund that had a membership, so a collective structure, which was focused on areas that I think are not only sort of economically important, that give great returns, that have given great returns in the African ecosystem, but also very impactful. I thought this is definitely what I want to do. particularly in healthcare. So in terms of healthcare, Nigeria has the highest number of children that die under the age of 5 years old, almost in the world. So the highest number of children, worse than Syria, worse than Afghanistan, worse than Iraq.
Wow.
So even for our level of development, we underperform in healthcare. We have some of the highest levels of mothers that die during the process of pregnancy and childbirth. We have some of the highest numbers of deaths from road traffic accidents in the world. So we underperform in almost every healthcare indices, even compared to countries that have a similar GDP per capita to us. So I think that that's a good area from an economic standpoint, because there's obviously a gap and we can bring returns to investors through disrupting that space. But it's also a very, very impactful area. And then I think for fintech, there's the argument for deep subject matter expertise, but there's also an impact argument. As you know, Nigeria has the highest number of people living in poverty in the entire world. And that number is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. I think that financial inclusion is important. It's an important tool for lifting people out of poverty. And in order to lift 90 to 100 million people out of poverty, I think we're going to have to really double down on getting people included in the economy, people formalized, and that's what financial technology businesses do. So I think, again, like the healthcare, there's a good case for financial returns, but there's also a good case for a huge amount of impact. And finance is actually something that comparatively, we have already in Africa, we have a comparative advantage in terms of mobile money, in terms of financial technology, the ease of being able to transfer money, the ease of being able to use apps for savings, for lending. I think Africa has always kind of led, and I think that this is a point where we can double down on that. I think that once a country discovers what their comparative advantage is, or once a continent discovers what their comparative advantage is, like, China discovered that they were pretty good at manufacturing, for instance, America discovered that they were pretty good at making planes. Yeah. I think that every country should really aim to double down at what they're good at.
Yes.
Because it's easier to get better at what you're good at than good at what you're bad at. Yeah, I think we've discovered what we're good at. We're good at banking. Nigerian banks have basically taken over Africa. We're good at fintech. We're good at mobile money. And these are things that not just Africa needs, but the world needs. So bringing these two areas that I believe that we have the expertise,
some expertise
in our team, and we have expertise in the country, or there's huge gaps in the country. Really, I think that this is the right time to focus on those two sectors, put capital into those two sectors, and give returns to ordinary investors.
I think it's a really compelling thesis, really, really interesting. I do agree with you on domain expertise and investors who understand the space that they're investing in quite deeply. The approach and the focus on individual investors is quite interesting. Definitely we've seen more of the investment clubs of late. It's definitely something that... So I think the focus on individual investors rather than institutions is quite interesting. Obviously, we've seen more of the investment clubs as an approach. And I think what's promising about that is it gives more ordinary people a chance to get tech returns, and then to further deepen, to reinvest and develop the spaces and the opportunities in the tech industry. So that's definitely an interesting approach. From your perspective, for people who haven't ever invested in tech or who haven't invested in a fund like this, what would you say to them? Why should they come and participate in a fund like this? Why would it be interesting?
So I think why would it be interesting is the question, right? I think that, like me, there's a lot of professionals that don't want to leave their jobs. And, our executives in pharmaceutical companies, they're doctors working in hospitals, they're bankers working in their banks, and they don't necessarily want to go off and start a business. But they do want exposure to the kind of returns that a business can give you. I don't think everybody should or can be an entrepreneur, but I think that a lot of people do have entrepreneurial energy that they want to channel somewhere, while still working in their jobs. So they want that element of security. but they also want to be able to experience entrepreneurship through their investments and be able to grow their wealth through their investments without leaving their salaried jobs. And they also want to develop their expertise. So there's an argument for financial returns, but I also think for some people it's a self-actualization as well, in terms of getting exposure to entrepreneurs, being able to work with entrepreneurs, being able to invest alongside entrepreneurs, to be able to experience an entrepreneurial journey whilst perhaps still in their jobs. There are also entrepreneurs that want to diversify. There's a lot of people like me that built businesses that are profitable and want to diversify into other industries, want to be able to lend their expertise to other businesses, and this is a pathway to do that.
Let me clarify now, so you're investing in health tech and fintech businesses.
Yes.
But the people who are investing, and definitely, of course, if people are in the medical field or if they have financial expertise, it's fantastic for them to come. But I imagine that you're open to people outside of it.
Oh yeah, non-experts as well.
Essentially, are looking at the good returns in fintech, the good returns in health tech,
absolutely,
and invest in this fund because
absolutely,
there's an opportunity to sort of
absolutely
partake in those returns.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's critical. That's good to know. If people do want to invest in this fund, how do they engage with you? How does that happen?
Absolutely. So our website is www.fdhic.com, and there's actually a sign-up form on our website where, because we still have to accredit the investors, so we have to do a bit of due diligence to make sure that they have an understanding of the asset class, and to make sure like they're not using the money that they're supposed to use for their children's school fees to do investing, right? I think they have to be at a certain level, both financially and professionally, to understand. And that's why we have the accreditation process. And that takes place via our website where they apply to join the collective. And then we hopefully send them an acceptance.
Fantastic. That sounds exciting. Yeah. We want to keep this pretty short and informative for people who are looking to understand what the fund is and how it works and to engage with it. Congratulations on your third fund, and I hope it's successful. I hope it's impactful, and I hope it gives the returns on every level that you've built it for.
Thank you very much. It's been great speaking to you.
Excellent.